Welcome in, everybody, to Grind Time, powered by Full Time Fantasy and the FFWC. I'm your host, Billy Muzio, and I'm joined today by Austin Martin. And Austin Martin is the Dynasty King. I searched high and low through the internet to find a selfie of him, and this is the only one that exists on the internet. So wanted to make sure that we were able to show his face to the listeners, to the subscribers, because this was a very hard picture to find. So glad I was able to get something on here to represent him truly. But for those who don't know Austin, he has been a guru in the Dynasty world and a high-stakes fanatic. I mean, he has won countless high-stakes leagues titles, including Dynasty titles. He has played at multiple sites. He won the $20,000 entry over at the NFFC, the Platinum title, with Dave Hubbard and Nelson Sousa. He won the $500,000 playoff contest challenge. He's had a top 10 finish in the main event, 5K Big Payback League runner-up, and has a total career earnings of over $900,000 in the fantasy industry. 100,000 in just Dynasty alone. So I want to welcome you to the show, Austin. It's been a long time coming, but thanks for joining me. How are you doing today?
Doing well, Billy. Thanks for having me. Long time coming.
It has been. I know we've been trying to get this together for like a few months now. We've been going back and forth, and we both have kids and families and jobs and you know, countless leagues. So it's a tough time to gather these schedules together, but we finally made it happen. Memorial Day weekend, we're kicking off. You know, one of the best barbecue weekends of the year with some Dynasty football. So I can't think of a better way to spend the weekend.
Yeah, let's go.
Well, let's just hop into it. So I want to jump through some generic questions first. Why don't you let the listeners know how long you've been playing high stakes football, and specifically Dynasty?
Yeah, about 10 years. So been playing both high stakes and Dynasty for little better than 10 years. I started playing high stakes Dynasty about 7 years ago. So kind of redraft is kind of where I found high stakes, and it's just evolved over time, and got plenty of both going on. So enough to keep me busy.
And so I know you and I are both volume drafters. You draft volume and redraft, but let listeners know how many Dynasty teams you have, because I think this is important for them to hear, because we all know how much work Dynasty entails. And I just want to curious how many leagues you have and how much time is that taking you?
Yeah, I've got like 55 Dynasty teams. Similar number to last year. Kind of tried to weed out some of the lower entry stuff this offseason and replace it with higher dollar entries, just to kind of, you know, make it all worthwhile, because it's super time consuming. And then, you know, with redraft too, I've been setting a goal to keep it under 100 teams this year. So we'll see if we can make that happen. But yeah.
How much in entries do you have in just Dynasty?
How much?
Like entry fees?
Oh, you know, I have a partner for pretty much all my teams. So our portfolio is about 60,000 in entries. So a little over 1,000 a team, I guess, on average. Most teams are between 750 and 2,500, with one 5K and a couple 500s that I keep, that are like invite only type leagues that got to stick around.
And so I know we talked about you do redraft as well. Would you say that Dynasty football has made you a better redraft player as well?
Yeah, I think it has for me, just in the fact that it's, you know, there's no really turning off. I mean, you can take, you know, short mental breaks, but you kind of have to be engaged year round. And, you know, I kind of joke, stay ready. You don't have to get ready, because that's really what it is. It's just kind of an accumulation of knowledge. And so you're just adding to it all the time as things change and evolve, you know, coaching staff, players, the draft, pre-draft, post-draft, combine, the whole process. It's all tied together, and you can't really unplug when you're in Dynasty. So
I always joke around. People say, "Oh, football's over. It's off-season time." There's no off-season in Dynasty League. Like that's when the work begins, right? You're evaluating players. You're looking at the draft class that's coming into the new year, like this year, the 2022 draft class. You're watching film. You're trying to find your sleepers, the ones you're targeting, and which picks, and organizing your teams. Like people think that there's an off-season of football, and there really isn't. I mean, for the grinders like yourself, especially in the Dynasty leagues with 55 plus dynasty teams, that's when you're doing your research. Is there a difference in, are you doing things differently there? Or?
Well, the big thing, a lot of the leagues that I play in, you have to cut down, whether it's to 16 or 18 players. So you have a cut down period before the draft. And so, once the season's over, if you don't if you don't start consolidating talent and liquidating some of these assets, you're going to end up making tough cuts for players that really shouldn't be cut. So it starts right away, right after the Super Bowl. That following week, trading is turned back on, and get to work because, again, you just don't want to leave any usable players on your bench and you end up having to cut them. So it's tough because, you never like cutting to 16, but when you know what's coming and yet you're anticipating that, you get to work and make the most of it and make an edge out of it instead of, complaining about it.
So we mentioned the quantity in which you're drafting, 55 dynasty teams, but do you think that there is a different strategy for someone like yourself who's drafting volume for someone who's maybe in a handful of drafts or who's just looking to get into dynasty?
Yeah, if I had considerably fewer teams, my player pool would be a little bit tighter. I still think that I, generally have a lot of conviction in the players that I'm going after, and I think my player pool is tighter than most. But, in a class like this year's rookie class, for example, after the 101, it's pretty wide open. So I found myself taking some players that I didn't necessarily expect to. Just kind of planning to play the market, even though I like some of those players in the mid first round as much, or maybe even prefer them a little bit in some cases. But, we've got months up until the season. Values are going to change. Some of these players won't be on my roster entering week one. So I'm definitely more open to adding different players, just given the volume and kind of trying to play the numbers.
So we have a couple questions here from Jose. His first question is, why do you choose to play Dynasty?
I think the biggest thing, what I like about it, is the work and equity that you've built up from one year can carry over to the next. So you grind, you build teams, you're at an advantage. You get to carry that over and continue to benefit from it. Redraft is nice. You have a clean slate every year. You start over, and I like that too. But there is something about, building up some equity with these teams that you get to carry over year to year.
And his next question is, if I would like to start playing Dynasty, where do I go and how much should I play? First part, there's a lot of different sites out there, including FFWC, who have Dynasty leagues. But how much would you recommend, Austin, for a new Dynasty player who wants to dip their toes in the high stakes?
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of different sites that you can play. And, I would start with whether it's, $100 price point or $200 price point. I mean, there's the various sites have stuff, I think, starting as low as maybe like $35 or $77, depending on where you're playing. But yeah, I mean, you can get in for $100 or $200 and just to kind of get a feel for it. I still continue to maintain my one $250 league that was the first high stakes Dynasty league, kind of as a tribute or whatever, kind of the first one I started with. So I continue to hold that. But yeah, there's price points. You don't have to throw around crazy cash like we were talking about to get involved.
Yeah, I've only been playing high stakes Dynasty for 5 years. I started Dynasty before, and I think my first draft pick in Dynasty was Alvin Kamara. I think it was 2017, if I recall, when he was drafted. But I remember looking at the roster, and I needed a tight end, and I also needed a running back. And I was watching tape and just fell in love with Alvin Kamara. But that was, I think, the same year O.J. Howard was also drafted, and I passed on OJ Howard and picked Kamara in like the end of the first round or middle of the first round. And remember people laughing at me because this was like in my first high stakes dynasty league. And people were like, you could have got him in round 2 and all this stuff. And I was at the end of the year though, team was money because Kamara is what he was. But but you look at like that's I think I entered my first league was a $250 league as well. But I had been playing high stakes before that. So if you're new to high stakes or you're new to dynasty or both at the same time, probably wouldn't recommend $250 because there's a lot of things to learn and pick up on and nuances in the dynasty world that I think take time to kind of comprehend and to fine tune. So I would recommend, like Austin said, an entry level dynasty league at first, dip your toes, and then once you're comfortable, start kind of escalating your buy-ins.
Yeah, and the thing about carrying equity forward, you carry negative equity forward too. So so don't get too carried away because if you make some mistakes early on, you have to deal with those. So you're on the hook for those entry fees, or you can walk away from a team and give up a deposit or whatever the case is. But you definitely are committing yourself to more than just 1 year. So you make the wrong pick or you make the right pick, you live with the results.
Yeah, and you can't emphasize that enough, living with those results. Well, let's hop into, since we're talking about Dynasty and a little bit about rosters, let's just jump into what is the best way that you think, or what is the best way that you believe is to build a Dynasty roster?
Yeah, easy. Just pick all the good young players, right? It comes down to format for me. I definitely like just going back to my roots of starting redraft. I always really, kind of lean into the receivers, but it depends on the format. FFWC is a wide receiver heavy format. I think you can, probably not take too many receivers over there. I like to usually, regardless of format, get one good young running back that is going to be good now and later, kind of hang my hat. And then if another one comes to me at a value, I'll grab them. Otherwise, I'm usually kind of trying to load up at receiver, pushing tight end and quarterback back in just about all formats, even sometimes super flex. But there are super flex formats where you only get 2 receivers and 1 flex, and that type of format really kind of devalues receivers. So I think you can't have just one blanket strategy. You got to look at the roster lineup requirements, what the benches are like, and kind of figure it out from there based on the scoring.
Now, if you were in a dynasty startup today, are you playing for the future? Are you playing for the present? What do you think is the best way to build in a startup? And let's just assume we're an FFWC format wide receiver 3 start.
Yeah, I'm kind of greedy, so I want it all. I like to play for now and later. Very rarely will I find myself, doing the productive struggle or kind of punt year 1. But it's interesting because I've looked at all those teams where I've kind of employed that strategy. You're basically waving the white flag for year 1, and they've always ended up being super strong teams if you build them right and put the right young pieces on there, accumulate draft picks. But usually, most of the drafts I go in, I'm trying to start with a good young core, and then I'll add risk and age kind of as the draft goes on. But I want those good young players to kind of, again, hang my hat on, know that I'm building for something that I can compete right now, but I'm going to get stronger as time goes on.
Now, I've always say that in Dynasty, you want to kind of keep an eye on the horizon. What does that mean to you as a Dynasty player?
Yeah, I think it's just about kind of being mindful of what's coming, being ahead of the curve rather than reactive. All throughout the process, accumulating knowledge, making decisions. Like you just don't want to wait around for news to pop and then go make your moves. Like you have to be ahead of the curve on some of this stuff, whether you're buying or selling. And especially when you have a large portfolio, because if you just have 1 or 2 teams and something pops and you need to make a move, like you can turn around and make that move pretty quickly. If you have that player on 12 teams, you're moving a little bit quicker. So, I think it's just always trying to be a step ahead. And that's hard because there's so much information out.
Now, are you gambling on kind of steps ahead? And what I mean by this, I know like in the offseason, you and I talked, and we were talking about potential Russell Wilson landing spots. In particular, I think it was a Cortland Sutton trade or a Jerry Jeudy trade that I was bouncing off of you, and we were discussing. And I said, well, if Russell Wilson lands in Denver, this is a clear win, I think, on the Jeudy or Cortland side, whatever. I can't remember which one it was, to be honest with you. But
Yeah.
are you gambling like that in Dynasty if you have a need, a positional need, say for a wide receiver, and let's just say that this was your team and you needed a receiver and this trade came across to you, do you find yourself gambling in this situation, or are you a little bit more conservative when it comes to projecting player outcomes and landing spots?
Yeah, so my thinking on that particular situation evolved a little bit. Like right early on, I wasn't seeing it. I really didn't think Wilson was going to end up leaving. So I was, unloading some Sutton. I ended up unloading Sutton for, I think in one league, a second and a third. Not looking good today, right? He's, you can't get him for that. You're probably going to have to give up. I mean, you're probably not going to give up a first, but it's probably what it's going to take to get him. So, yeah, but I mean, you have to speculate on some of that stuff. I did end up adding some Jeudy as it got a little bit closer. And so I did, gain some value that way. But yeah, you've got to speculate on some of that stuff and, what's going to happen with these players and landing spots. And can you remember a crazier offseason?
No, I mean, this was the off season on crack is what I was saying to everybody.
It's nuts.
It's just anything that we knew about the NFL was out the window, and
Yeah.
it reminded me of other sports and their trade deadlines, and it was just madness. It really was. Like, it was just the NFL was just flipped upside down on its head with all these moves, because I mean we never see this many big names be moved in an offseason, and as frequent as it was this offseason just completely changed the entire dynamic and landscape of the NFL. So I mean, for dynasty players, it was madness. It was just
I mean, three top 10, you could say close to 3 top 5 receivers on the move. And then still, the Debo situation kind of lingering out there. It's been pure chaos. Sometimes I like to think, like, how is it possible that the NFL just gets crazier and crazier every year? Aside from just this COVID, but it has been. So
seems like Antonio Brown's been rubbing off on people. So you mentioned, wide receivers. So you said there's 3 top 10, possibly top 5. Now, when you are focusing on talent or players that you're drafting, are you looking more of a ceiling of a player, or are you looking at more of a floor, a combination? How are you identifying talent, and who are you targeting?
Yeah, I mean, I try to factor it all in. I think everyone does. You're trying to bake it all in, but I definitely lean into ceiling. You're trying to build not just competitive teams, but true monster teams that are going to dominate for an extended period of time. And so I think you need to take those big swings. So if I'm weighing two options, with a similar floor, I'm definitely going to lean into the one with the higher ceiling. So talent is high on my list because situations change.
Yeah.
It can change rapidly too, and sometimes you just misevaluate the situation. Take the more talented player, and you end up with the best of both worlds. So I think that's we see that happen time and time again with these situations changing, either from a quarterback coming in, now more frequently trades, a lot more going on just with free agents. So situations can change a lot quicker than you'd think.
So you have your ceiling, you have your floor. Where does that age cliff come in? And does age matter in Dynasty to you? Or is it just more of a tiebreaker than a rule?
I mean, I've definitely, the longer I've been playing, the more I've kind of weighted it. You play long enough to see players that you draft retire, and you realize that Father Time is undefeated. And it just happens over and over. And so, people giving up 3 firsts for Cooper Kupp, I don't see it. It's just not how I would play. I don't think you have to win. That's the thing. So I'm definitely leaning into the youth and trying to accumulate picks. Get off a guy a year too early than a year too late. With running backs, it's kind of that 26-year-old year where they're kind of, capping out. Wide receivers, you can maybe add 2 years. But after that, I'm starting to turn the page. I mean, I'm not out here necessarily trying to give away Stephon Diggs or Tyreek Hill, but I'm not aggressively going after him either. So if there's an opportunity to pivot to a slightly younger guy, if I could pivot to from a Diggs or a Tyreek up to A.J. Brown, and maybe I give up a second-round pick with it or something like that, that's the type of deal I'd be looking for.
So at what point do you think, like, if your roster, and maybe this is a bad example, but what point do you switch from win now to build mode? And which point are you going from youth to, hey, my youth have really shined, I think I have a chance this year? At what point are you willing to kind of give up future picks or sacrifice the future in order to make a run for the title? Because we've seen it in leagues. Like, you thought you're building for the future, your future's come a lot quicker than you anticipated, and now you're in win now mode, but with also the future in mind. How are you balancing that?
Yeah, so I think more of the rebuild type teams are the ones that I've gotten into that were like a discounted orphan. So got in for like half price for the first year, and kind of have to make some moves. But if I have, one of my own teams that I've drafted and have maintained for a few years, you kind of have to look at the roster and just look at, if you have 3 to 5 guys that are kind of really have most likely had their best year, and those are, the top of your talent, you need to start thinking about making a change. Now, I had one of those teams this year, and I thought it was time to start rebuilding. And I have to say, it's not very often that I'm really in rebuild mode. I'm just kind of trying to retool all the time. But I tried to break a team down, and I really just couldn't get enough movement, couldn't get the right young pieces, unloading guys like Delvin, Mixon, Keenan Allen, Terry McLaurin. Like, these are guys that are not probably being valued quite where their production is going to be. So I ended up just making another move. I brought in, traded, I think, the 102 and 108 for Saquon, Chris Godwin, and Russell Gage. So it was like a situation where if I can't blow this thing up and rebuild, I've got enough pieces to compete. So just going to make that move.
Go for it.
Yeah.
All right, I like that. Do you so we talked about talent earlier, ceiling and floor. Do you believe when you're drafting rookie classes, are you dedicated more, or are you focusing more on talent or need first?
Most of the formats right now, it seems like in rookie drafts, it's interesting because there's a split between rookie drafts and startups. Like, this year, it was really weird to me how Kenneth Walker went off at the 102 in almost every rookie draft. It was probably 65, 70%. But I didn't see a single startup where Kenny Walker went ahead of Drake London and Treylon Burks.
Exactly.
It was really, really interesting. So I think there's a lot more people that are drafting on need. Now, my approach this year, I had, not very many 101s, but I had a handful of 102s. I was trying to move back. 106 was my cutoff. I felt like at 106, you're going to get Garrett Wilson or Jamison Williams, who I really preferred. So I moved back to that 106 a lot. But where I couldn't, I really split it up. So I took some Walker, I got some London, and I got some Burks, even though, Drake London wasn't my favorite player as far as evaluating him. But I think the market's going to continue to be high on him. He's a 20-year-old rookie. The opportunities are going to be there. So I think the market will hold his value, where if I decide I want to move on from him, and especially if he catches a little bit of steam, I'll be ready to pull the trigger on that.
Well said. Famous Jay has a question here, or I should say more of a statement, but I'm going to turn it into a question. I've been in the Dynasty for 3 years. I know my weakest point is with trading, determining player values when it comes to draft picks. Any advice you can give him how to determine a player's value and equating it to draft picks, or any tool that you use?
I mean, there's, I kind of, in a way, I feel like trade calculators have sort of broken Dynasty, but, it's what people use and how they evaluate the market. So I use them to kind of get a feel for what people are probably thinking. But more so, I'm looking at current startups, startups that I did last week or last month, because there definitely was one. And, the information's out there. So what better information than, using current startup data to figure out, what's a fair trade. So that's kind of how I do it.
Are you all in on 23 picks, or is the class overhyped?
Ross, my man. I'm in on the 23 picks. Been accumulating them. Think if I did a count right now, I probably would have, somewhere between like 1.5 and 2, probably like 1 3/4 firsts per team. So I've been adding them where I can. Definitely in. It's supposed to be the best class in many years. So it also just kind of goes hand in hand with what my strategy has evolved to. Although this wasn't a great class, I think just generally trying to accumulate picks and win with the players on your roster is a sound strategy. And as a follow-up to one of your earlier questions, determining when to pull the trigger and to go all in, I'm not making that move in June. If I'm making that move, it's in August, it's in September. It might be more so at the trade deadline. Now, I know you want to have players to compete the early part of the season, but if I can help it, I'm really trying to keep those picks in pocket. When the trade deadline comes and I don't have to worry about injuries 2, 3, 4 weeks from now, I can make a trade and put a player on my team that I know can help me these next 2, 3, 5 weeks. That's when I'm making that move. And it's on a team where I'm competing for league money, a first-round playoff bye. You're making those moves to lock in the money. You don't necessarily need to make that move 3 months before it's in play. If that one trade for that one player is the move that you needed to compete, you probably weren't a legit contender anyways.
Well said. So next question's in relation to college football and film study. And do you read more about college football, or do you watch more college football?
Man, I used to watch way more college football. I try to watch college football as much as I can. Now I have 4 and 5-year-old girls, so it's a battle. But yeah, you'll find me watching college football on Saturdays. That's where the film study starts. You pick up information, you see things. It's nice to have a little bit of a base knowledge before the NFL offseason, and you have to just start digging in, watching tape, evaluating. But I'm just trying to pick up as much information from people that I respect, but also just understanding what the market is too, because that's as big a part of it as just making the right calls is knowing where the market is and how you can kind of strategize through that.
How much time would you say? I know having children is definitely tougher to watch film, but how much time would you say that you dedicate or is dedicated to film study?
It's not a crazy amount for me. I figured like 10 to 20 hours total of just like watching prospects. And it's, I don't spend too much time on players like outside of the top couple of rounds. Cause then, there are other factors that are going to lead me towards those players, not just talent. In the 3rd and 4th round of dynasty drafts, situation is going to be a bigger thing.
Absolutely.
You're looking for those, like Davis Price was a running back that totally slipped through the cracks for me in the pre-draft process, but he ended up on the Niners. I'm interested. So went back and watched him. I mean, I like him. He's not special, but you don't have to be special in that system. So it's not a crazy amount of film time, but I definitely like to see it with my eyes, just opposed to reading some rankings or what someone else says.
And for those who are new to Dynasty, if you have not seen them, I did a bunch of rookie videos. I think I did the top 40 or so. It's at the Full-Time Fantasy YouTube channel. I'll throw the links down here to all the playlists inside the chat inside of this video on YouTube, and that'll lead you directly to the quarterback, wide receiver, running back, and tight end evaluations that I did. So that is a good place to start, and then you can expand from there, because each one of those videos are about 1.5 minutes long and gives you a lot of information that you need on those players.
Yeah, I love it. That's a lot of good information in a short period of time. Like, you don't need to spend all day. Just find someone like Billy that you trust. Let him do the work, and you take it in.
Dude, there was a bunch of grinding on each one of those. Would take me about 2 hours to make, from like watching tape to writing down notes, and then trying to think of comps and comparing comps versus other analysts that I respect to make sure I'm just not like completely out of left field, right? I'm at least in the ballpark on this comp, or making sure that I'm evaluating this player at least semi correctly. Like, there's some players I really like that where analysts were like, oh, no go, and that's just part of the nature of the game. But between creating the video itself, editing the video, recording it, and then kind of taking all the information and putting into one video is roughly about 2 to 2.5 hours per video. It's 1.5 minute video.
It's pretty silly.
Oh, great. I got someone come on and tell me I'm on the clock right now. Well, they can wait. We're talking Dynasty right now.
I think I'm on the clock right now for a couple Dynasty picks too. I've got a couple trades in my inbox, but
right. Tell them to hold their horses over there, Roy. We're talking Dynasty. We're not doing Superflex right now.
It's an interesting decision we can maybe get to towards the end here.
Yeah, let's as we kind of, I think as we kind of get closer towards the end, let's pull up your decision. Let's talk through it. I'm curious to hear the product live on.
Yeah, my picks usually are pretty, usually have a lot of conviction, and I make them pretty quickly. So I think it's an interesting one.
Well, great. Let's outside Superflex, we just mentioned I'm on the clock in a Superflex Bowl draft, but outside of Superflex, what is your strategy typically with like quarterback and tight end? I know it varies by format.
I'm pushing them back most of the time. If Pitts slips a little bit in the first, past a few receivers, I'll pounce, but it just hasn't happened yet. Same with Andrews. It's like usually when I'm on the clock, there's just a running back or a receiver that I like better. I just don't end up finding myself taking the quarterbacks or tight ends early. I look throughout all my teams, and I've got a fair amount of Josh Allen and Herbert and Dak and Kyler, a little bit of Lamar. I mean, these guys are all mixed in, but I got them when they were cheap. I'll take shots on them early when they aren't so expensive, and then find the next guy, because in these formats, I mean, they're just not difference makers for me. Knowing that you can always find one, like even in tight end premium, there's always tight ends to be had. I know you're probably not going to find many 40 burgers sitting on the waiver wire, but for me, that depth, that running back and receiver is more sustainable. And I'd rather invest in that most of the time.
Okay. Now, we talked about trading earlier, but tell me, what are your thoughts on trading in Dynasty League? Are you actively trading? Walk me through that. Yeah,
so it's kind of two-part question, I guess. I'd say there's the question in startup and then just the ongoing. So, what I really like about most Dynasty startup drafts is the ability to trade on the clock and be able to move up and move back. And, you're not forced into making a pick that you don't want to make. If if you don't like the board, or if the board is just, there's screaming value, but it's a guy that you don't want, someone's going to pay, get some value out of it and bump back. So I really enjoy that about startup drafts, and I can go either way. I mean, I can trade up or trade back, accumulate picks, not trying to give up my future first too much this year. But I think that's the key, is just staying flexible and, taking what the board gives you, what the room gives you, really. In terms of, managing my portfolio on an ongoing basis, once I kind of have drafted the team, or if I bought it as an orphan, I'm gonna pretty aggressively try and put my stamp on it, make it what I want, unload the players that I don't like, get the ones that I want. And then it's just an ongoing management process. I'm looking constantly for players that things could be evolving in a positive or negative way. If I need to get them off my rosters, or if there's someone that I want to add before I think their price is going to, bump. I'm kind of trying to do that across the board. So I'm looking at my teams probably twice a week, all of them, I look at maybe 15 or 20 teams a day and I'm just kind of constantly grinding. And, you keep your finger on the pulse with what's going on. And so, yeah, it's pretty constant. But if there's a move that I'm looking to make, like, I'm not afraid to do it across the board. So offers will be flying if there's a guy I want to unload. Like Michael Thomas last year, the first sign of trouble, it just was not looking good. And, stock was down, but got rid of it all because it's down further. And you had to carry him all year. So it's like, if you think you have an edge somewhere, jump on it. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? You're wrong. He comes back. You traded for another player. You're not drawing dead. So
I love that you said you're constantly grinding, right? That's why I named this show Grind Time, right? People don't realize how much of a grind it is when they are looking to draft volume or looking to jump into high stakes and trying to gain every competitive edge that they can to outbest their opponents. And that is the key, I think, in my opinion, is the constant grind. It's the ability to outwork your opponent and the ability to consistently put in the time, energy, and effort that is needed to succeed. So I love how you said that you did it in phases. Like, you have 55 rosters. You're not looking through all of them in a 1 week phase, right? That's just too much. But I think you said you had 15 per week. Is that, or did you say per day?
I'll browse through like 15 teams a day and just kind of checking through. I mean, I'm starting with the higher dollar entry teams, so I'm looking at those more
priorities.
Frequently. Yeah. So, but you got to touch them all. So, but I mean, there are days where I'll skip, where I'm not necessarily doing dynasty football. Work gets busy with the girls. I mean, life does go on beyond dynasty football, believe it or not. I know, it's crazy. But yeah, so I mean, I am looking at every team every week, but I'm definitely prioritizing them based on entry.
Okay, I like that. Well, let's move on to like processes and I guess, if helping others improve or yourself with growth. If you could go back in time, right? Time machine is here. We're the Simpsons, and you have one piece of advice that you could give yourself year one in Dynasty. What would it be?
Let's see, what was my answer for that one? I haven't been looking at the show sheet. I think the biggest one, and it's not, it's one thing to have principles. It's another to have hard and fast rules. And I know it's kind of a balance, because there are players, we all want to make exceptions, right? This running back that came out of nowhere is going to be the one that's going to hold his value and increase, right? We say it all the time about these guys. I think the biggest thing is if you can be disciplined enough to cash out on those players that you pick up off the waiver wire, or you drafted in the 4th, 5th round of your rookie draft, and you can figure out a way to more safely lock in value, or even better yet, trade for a future pick, preferably a first. That's the best thing to do, because otherwise you're gonna end up holding these players, and the value is gonna fall out the bottom, and you're holding what you started with. So again, a guy that I want to be shopping more than I am this year is Eli Mitchell. Haven't been able to move him much, because it just seems like he's not quite valued where he should be for his potential upside in that system. But I did unload him in a 2.5K league for Travis Etienne straight up 3 months ago.
That's a win.
Yeah, that's a win. I mean, regardless of what you think. And then when you further consider that I had a lot of Eli Mitchell, and I got most of it, I got all of it really, in the 3rd to 5th round of rookie drafts, late in startup drafts, or for $700 or $800 fab. Yeah. And so if you can lock in a player like Etienne with his profile and opportunity, that's a huge win. And, and that's a 2.5K league. These aren't, chumps playing. So when you can make those moves, I think you got to do it. It's hard though, because I like him. I like Mitchell too, and I'll buy him for the right price. But I think that that ship has probably sailed a little bit. You're not getting anything close to ETN for him.
Before you mention his name, I was going to say I feel like this is an Elijah Mitchell sentiment. So it really brings it to. I'm more of a homer, of course, the red and gold behind me, but I also do think that he has secured his role. I think that the Price signing or a draft will definitely hurt because he's not running ahead of guys like Wilson and Sermon anymore. But I do think that he still has a role in this offense. Now, is it 80% like it was? No, but I think 50 to 60% probably realistic, which definitely hurts his value in the immediate future. Plus, we saw that he had some health concerns. So I know there's a lot of intake there, but if I'm in the league with you, I'm probably buying Mitchell. But again, that's a lot of a homer inside of me as well.
I mean, I've taken him in a startup this offseason. I took him, I think, in the mid-6th of a 1 QB startup. So if the price is right, I'm definitely still interested. I'm trying to get Davis Price too. I'd like to lock that up, and you can do that really cheaply.
Yes.
I was even more interested when it seemed like Debo was gone. That really would have opened things up for Mitchell to be a real monster. And maybe that, ship isn't totally sailed. There's no guarantee Debo is back, but it kind of seems like it's the pendulum swung a little bit there. But you're the Niners guy. What do you think?
Well, I was actually in the mindset, like when we did our 1K draft over at the FFWC, the startup that we did this year. If you noticed, I double tapped Mitchell and Ayuk in the 5th and the 6th round over there.
Yeah.
And I had initially believed that Debo was gone. For me, it was like, hey, I'm going to lock up the wide receiver 1 and the running back who's going to be the biggest beneficiary of Debo's absence. Now, I still think there is a chance it happens. I don't think it's as likely as it was before the draft. Like prior to the draft, I would have said, hey, 65 to 70% chance Debo's gone. Right. Yeah. Where I think now it's kind of reverse. I think it's more 65 to 70% chance Debo stays just because teams are starting to settle in. We got mini camp starting soon. Now there's a lot that can still happen. And if he just continues to hold out or whatever may happen, like, you look at
it could be an injury. I mean, there's ways.
It could be a cancer. And they just say, you know what, he's not in and his heart's not here. Just get rid of him. And so there's still a lot of time for this to kind of resolve itself. I still think there's a decent chance that he doesn't suit up as a Niner again, which I'm fine with as a Niner fan because I'm more of a system / chemistry guy when it comes to football and believing in the vision of the coach and the system. And in order to succeed, if you have that bad apple, regardless of how good he is, he's got to go. Yeah. And you have the rest of the team that's going to buy in. So a lot of these early drafts and even in redraft and especially in dynasty startups, I was targeting those two like clockwork, thinking that these two are going to be the biggest beneficiaries. And it's a gamble, but at the end of the day, you still have a decent running back and a wide receiver who kind of picked up steam towards the tail end of the year, who's still young, who has a lot of success in his future. So to answer your question, I'm unsure, but I still think Debo plays for the Niners come season time. But if he does move on, I agree with your statement completely. Elijah Mitchell is one of the biggest beneficiaries of that team.
Well, and Debo plays with reckless abandon. I mean, he's an injury risk all the time. So you still have outs. And I did a similar thing. I think I pushed Ayuk up in a draft after we did that 1K, and I passed Debo on a team that I built really around youth and accumulating picks. And I think I went down to like DJ Moore and past Debo. And, I wouldn't do that again, given that choice, but based on the way I was building the team, I had three additional future firsts and a bunch of young players. It just made sense to kind of lean into that younger build. So it's all contextual though.
Well, let's move on from the Niners. What is one process that you do that you believe separates you from the field?
Yeah, I was thinking about that one, trying to come up with something good. Honestly, I just think I work a little bit harder than everyone. And so is it a process? I don't know. I think I'm flexible. I think I see the board well, moving up and down, being able to spot value, knowing when to trade off of a pick on a flat tier, and still being able to slide back and get the guy you wanted, being able to kind of maneuver your way through that. And then, just the ongoing management of it. Again, I'm just always always going through these rosters, trying to eliminate weak spots, knowing that you've got to cut down, at the end of the season. I think you really would be well served to try and keep those last 3 to 4 bench spots as like churnable spots. I mean, they're not wasted positions, but knowing if you can't take them with you, like you need to maximize the way that you're handling that and not giving up value. Because when the cut line deadline comes around, people are giving up these players for,
cheap
pennies on the dollar. So it happens every year. You see it. People sat on their roster for 2 months, didn't do anything, and now they're cutting good players and giving them away.
Yeah, I always try to get something out of nothing, right? Even if it's a late round pick.
Yeah.
Anything to help your chances. You touched base on this earlier, and you said that, it's the constant grind. You get fatigued at times. So explain what fantasy fatigue is and how do you overcome it?
Man, it's all about fab. It's really what it comes down to. I know there are guys that just do a lot of best ball and they don't have to worry about setting lineups and doing fab. And I don't know. I guess you and I are the sick kind that has some kind of guilty pleasure with doing the fab grind. But I like being able to improve my team throughout the year. I think it's an edge. It's an evergreen edge. It's always there. And I personally think I'm doing myself a disservice not giving myself those opportunities. So I did a lot of best ball last year. I've pretty much decided to stay on the sidelines this year for best ball. I'm doing a couple of teams with my cousin, but otherwise I'm doing some startups right now, these slow drafts, but I'm kind of letting it marinate until mid-August, and then I'm going to jump in and probably do 20, 25 mains, and then, a handful of the big money leagues. And so it'll be a big, late August, early September push, but I'm gonna hopefully be a little bit more fresh going into it this year.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like my process this year. I mean, I'm still doing best ball like a maniac, but outside, I think that's what I've been using to kind of, settle my addiction when it comes to drafting. But I've been definitely, I've cut back a lot of that same thing, trying to keep it under 100 this year, which I'm going to, not counting best ball, but redraft and manage leagues underneath 100.
Yep.
And so same mindset. Dave and I have kind of laid out our plan for main events and the 10Ks and the 5Ks and getting everything situated. So I fully understand, like Tuesdays, like I work from home on Tuesdays because it's like waiver wires all day, right? Like I'm working in the background, but it's like in between like emails or if I'm doing a schedule, it's like waiver wire. So I would like to let you know that FFWC, we are creating and hopefully it's going to be live by the time the season kicks off, but a copy bid group to allow you to be able to copy that to every one of your leagues, so you don't have to grind and add everyone manually every single time, and you can just apply it to your league, select the leagues you want to apply it to, and then roll it out.
That's a game changer.
Save so much time.
That's a game changer for sure. I mean, the amount of time that it takes to set up these bid groups and copy them. I mean, you still have to add your drops and
your money, but whatever.
But I mean, the amount of time that'll save. I mean, that industry has been needing that for a while.
Yeah, I'm excited it's going to go live this year. All right, a couple more questions, and then we're going to look at your dilemma that you have in your draft. Give me 2 to 3 mistakes that you see managers make in Dynasty on a regular basis.
I kind of mentioned it once earlier. I think it's a big mistake to unload your future first-round pick in May or June. And especially if it's not a player that you're like a young ascending type player that is maybe undervalued, that doesn't, you need, if I'm making that move, it's one of two things. But if I'm unloading my first round pick, it needs to be a young ascending player that has a chance to be worth more next year than he is today, or more in a month than he is today. Or it needs to be right at the time of, the trade deadline, basically, where I'm in pole position. I need to win a few weeks, or I need to win 2 out of 3 or whatever it is to lock up some league money, secure a bye, which is effectively locking up, additional playoff money. it needs to be a move that I have immediate value. You end up unloading a pick like that on a aging, nearing the cliff type player, and you're just exposing yourself to so much risk. I mean, you could be drawing dead before the season starts with an injury. I mean, how many times do we have that last year? And again, those were with younger running backs too. So I think just people open themselves up to too much risk, making that move way too early when you could just hold that pick, and that pick is going to have the same or at least a very similar value right before the season, or when you get into the season and you see that you are in fact in a position to make that run. Because if you make that move and it backfires, now all of a sudden you are hoping that pick is going to be the 112 and you're staring down the barrel of 101, and you just traded that off for a dusty vet that couldn't help you. So I think that's the biggest one.
Now, does this change for you in a startup to where you can have more of an impact in the immediate future and the foreseeable future?
I'll trade the pick in a startup again under the conditions of drafting a young ascending player. It needs to be for the right type of player. I need to have players that have a chance to be worth more next year than they are now, or you're just giving up that value. And then you further complicate it by having to cut down. So now you're adding talent to the roster, and if you have to make cuts, you're just putting yourself in a really tough spot. So I just find it harder to get out of that kind of position than trading from strength with having those picks.
Okay, fair enough. Famous Jay says, here's a trade that he did. He traded away a 2024 first and a 2023 second for the 107 this year, which he chose Jameson Williams. His wide receivers on his team are Cooper Kupp, Adam Thielen in a Superflex tight end premium league. What are your thoughts on the trade?
I mean, I love Jameson. So, I mean, this, the value seems about right. 24 first. I mean, I don't know. Could you have gotten it done without the second? Probably not. I think that's kind of the cutoff, though. A 23 first for the 106 or 107 with the pick being Jameson is kind of my cutoff. You punt that down another year down the line. It's okay. I mean, I really like Jameson. And, if I was only doing one draft, man, at the end of the day, I'd be hard pressed to take any other receivers in this class over him. So I think it's okay.
Okay. Great. Famous Jay, you won. There you go. What is the last question, and then we'll hop into your dilemma on your league, your live draft, or I should say slow draft. But what is the best advice that you can give for our listeners who are either just dipping their toes in the dynasty waters or who have maybe in their first or second year?
I would say, figure out what you want dynasty football to be for you. The way I approach it is different than, most kind of more recreational type players. I'm trying to do a lot of leagues for a lot of money and kind of get as much in play as I can. And having these great sites to be able to do that is really nice. But they aren't as deep as some of the formats that more dynasty purists or the people that like 30 roster spots plus a 5-man or 10-man taxi squad. Like, what do you want this to be? If you want to be able to make moves and fix your team through fab, and have a deep rookie draft every year, the type of formats I play might make sense for you. But if you like to just draft a super deep team and hold your players, and I mean, you literally are not making cuts, like, some of those other formats and home leagues that cater to that might be more appealing. I just find it really hard to get money in a way that I feel like it's secure, and it's just hard to do that without a platform site. So I just don't get into it as much. It's just too hard to manage. Too many different formats across various platforms, and then with different people managing the money too. Not for me.
Great. Well, that is the best advice you can get from one of the best in the business. But before we wrap up the show, let's see what your dilemma is. You're on the clock in a slow draft right now. Walk me through the details.
Yeah, so it's a 1250 one QB startup. We're at the 5-6 turn. I've got 2 picks here. I've made 3 picks so far. I've got Breece Hall A.J. Brown and Deontay. And then I traded the 4th round pick that I had for a future first, a 10th, and a 12th round startup pick.
All right, say that one more time. I was like
So
trying to wrap my brain around it.
It was the 404 for a future first.
Okay, startup. Okay.
Future first plus a 10th round and 12th round startup pick. So for me, the value on a future first is roughly mid-5th.
Yep.
In startup in this format. So I think that price was about right. So that was just to explain why I only have 3 players on the roster. So the spot is I'm looking at 3 receivers. Keep in mind I have Brees on the squad already. I'm looking at both Jets and Bateman. So we got Wilson, your boy, Elijah Moore, and Bateman. My lean was Bateman and one of the Jets, and I'm leaning into Wilson, but it's tough, man. It's I was under on Elijah Moore last year. Didn't end up with very much of him at all, and on my existing teams, I don't have him. Period. But my evaluation of Wilson, I prefer him in a vacuum. Ownership starts to creep into it a little bit there. I don't want all 3 Jets.
No.
So I think you gotta go Bateman, make that bet, and then pick one of the Jets.
If it was me, I'm going Bateman and Wilson. I love Elijah Moore, and I think he's going to have a great career. I think the Wilson signing actually helps him because I think that's going to take a lot off underneath. But that being said, Wilson is just in another tier of talent to me, right? You look at his just playmaking ability, his physicality, like everything, everything about him you love, or I love, I should say. And I think that he has a real chance to be a big difference maker in the league. He was my number 1 wide receiver going into the draft. Landing spot kind of knocked him down based on situation a bit. But at the end of the day, talent-wise, I thought he was the best wide receiver in this draft class. Bateman is also another tantalizing talent, but he's now in a situation where he is catapulted into a lead role. The only person he's really competing for targets, at least in the immediate future, is going to be Andrews. And yes, it's a heavy run first team, but we have seen that this offense is able to support a wide receiver 1 as well as the tight end 1. And Bateman has just some really good hands, and you saw the games when he came back after his injury, was starting to make some real strides. So with Brown out of the equation, I like Bateman a lot. That's an easy one for me, and then I probably lean Wilson as well.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, I was going to feel fortunate if either of them made it. I wasn't necessarily expecting either of them to be there. So to have them both sitting there, the 5-6 turd seems like a pretty good value. I was considering offers to move back just slightly and then hope to still land both of them. Not really finding a deal that makes sense. So at the end of the day, probably just make the picks.
Well,
glad to hear even from an Elijah Moore truther that you lean into Wilson. That makes it a little easier for me.
I do, and again, I think it's also, I think, depends upon. And you said you're only 3 picks in, but it depends upon how you're going to structure the rest of your lineup, because they're completely different players, right? And going to serve different roles in this offense, and also for your fantasy team. So I think based upon the rest of your receivers, but knowing that Bateman is going to be one of them, I think Bateman and Wilson would be a good combo for a fantasy team in terms of outputs and floors and ceilings. And I think that Moore is as nice as it would be, probably wouldn't be as good of a fit in my opinion.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining, Austin. Again, it was a pleasure to have you on. Why don't you tell all the listeners where they can find you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, Austin R. Martin 84.
That's it. It's it's on the name up there, right below his name, the blue, at Austin R. Martin 84. Thanks for joining. Everybody got to hear advice from the Dynasty King himself. Again, a lot of career earnings and winnings here from Austin, and it was a pleasure to have you on, buddy. Have a good night, everybody, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Billy. Appreciate it.